Hi, this is Carly Opsett at the University of Arizona, and I'm going to walk you just briefly through some elements of the form for application for human research. Many parts of the form are really self-explanatory, and they've done a nice job in the last several years of making this form more useful and usable. But I'm just going to highlight some elements. So if you are conducting the research, you are the one filling out the form, entering the project title, and you are considered the principal investigator. You make sure that your advisor knows you're submitting this, and you get their name and their degree, contact information, and any alternate individual who may also be included. The required signature section, you include your signature on this form, and so this has been an issue because the Human Subject Protection Program requires now that all of the documents that you submit be submitted in electronic form. They won't take paper forms any longer, and they require signatures on this form. So generally what we do, or what I have students do, is prepare this page of the form separately as a PDF, and then we affix our signatures to the PDF using something like Adobe Reader or Preview on the Mac. But your signature goes here. The scientific scholarly review, that is the signature of the departmental institutional review board committee member, signifying that they've reviewed this form and that there is scientific and scholarly validity to the project. And you may go through a few rounds of revision with a departmental IRB committee member. But that's for your benefit, and generally they respond quickly, and you can deal with them individually. The department's signature is for the department chair to sign off that this has been reviewed. They generally will not review this in depth. They depend on the scholarly review of their departmental committee members. You know, if you're going to do this, actually do some research, you want to get this in pretty early. It can take, gosh, if you try to do this during the summer, it can take forever because the IRB departmental committee members are gone. You can get it back from them often in a week or two, in most cases. But research, planning research and carrying it out takes a while. It says here that this page can be deleted if not applicable. If you have an advisor, you'll need this. Won't need a responsible physician signature probably, and you may or may not need Native American or International Indigenous Populations review. If you'll need it if you are conducting your work with Native American students or adults. Then there's a general information page with questions. Lots of questions about how many other studies you're currently involved in, how long is the project, if it's funded. There's also a form that I'm not going to ask you to necessarily review or complete and turn in with your project that has to do with conflict of interest in research. And that definitely would require that if you're interested, you can check out the policy on investigator conflict of interest in research. It's something definitely that you do have to submit. or at least consider. And that has to do with whether or not you are, let's say you are have helped develop a method for counseling training, and you're publishing a book on the subject, and you also want to do some research on that methodology. You might have to disclose that you have some conflict of interest. And then whether or not this is a clinical trial, you guys will probably say no to that. Then comes the major part of the form, which is the project narrative, and you can see that they've put in red here all of the elements that or information about all the elements, and explain what goes under each category. It used to be that they did not have all this nice explanation included. It's really excellent that they do now, because the form is largely self-explanatory. So you delete this red text as you go along, and as you read each section, you just provide the information that they want. Don't write NA or not applicable in any area. Provide a sentence, explain why it's not applicable, because the departmental review person will want to know why that section is not applicable, and so will the U of A IRB. So under background, you know what you can do for background? Grab the introduction to your project, and that should fit nicely in the background. Lay summary is just a little more brief explanation. Doesn't have to be 400 words, but it shouldn't be over 400 words. You could even find a way to divide your introduction and use pieces of it for background and lay summary. But really, background is that introduction piece. Lay summary is, here is a couple sentences about the problem, a couple sentences about what the question is, a couple sentences about what it is you're going to do, and a couple sentences about what you hope to find. And maybe the importance. The setting, that is self-explanatory. Resources available, that's relatively self-explanatory. The study population, so we're not worried about power analysis because it's a single subject research. Who and how many, and if you are looking at a vulnerable population like children, pregnant women, neonates, prisoners, or cognitively impaired adults, you may want to look at the appendix. And this appendix, this refers to the investigator's manual. There's a section at the end of the investigator's manual that describes the items they want you to address if you're working with children or pregnant women or one of those other vulnerable categories. I'm not going to ask you to create informed consent documents, but I do want you to think about the fact that you're going to have informed consent documents, and you're going to have to describe your process for recruiting individuals. And that's one of the reasons why completing the IRB forms is often really enlightening, because what seems like a simple study sometimes hangs on our ability to recruit individuals and to come up with recruitment methods that are reasonable and ethical. Then there is a section again on the procedures, and they want this in lay language. with a simple timeline. They want you to describe any risks to subjects, potential benefits to subjects or society. Again, don't put NA in either of these sections. You know, you may want to list under risks. If you're doing an intervention with students, it could have something to do with minor psychological impact. Probably won't be physical or legal or economic. And in terms of benefits, improved, if you're doing intervention with an individual, could be improved behavior if you're doing an intervention to increase the number of counseling sessions that a person attends. The potential benefit is that the individual will receive additional or an appropriate number of counseling sessions. And perhaps also describe, if you're going to generalize to larger populations, that the same methodology might be used to benefit the lives of other individuals. Then they want you to talk about confidentiality of data and privacy issues, and this is a really interesting and important piece to consider. And who has access to that information, really critical for them. Right? One of the important reasons that the IRB at the U of A exists is to protect the university with respect to laws that govern ethics. And so they want some very specific information from you about the data and how that data is going to be held and who's going to have access to it. They want you to describe any costs to subjects, any possible compensation you might be providing. Medical care and compensation for injury. Remember, don't just put NA, but describe whether or not there is any, if there's not any risk of injury, then write that down. There's minimal risk of injury, or limited or no risk of injury. Monitoring the data for subject safety. They want you to make sure that you describe how and when and why subjects could be removed from the study. So withdrawal of subjects. And that's important. So if someone wants to leave the study, how are they going to do it? And what are you going to provide them with if they want some other assistance? So let's say you decide to stop an intervention with, or a child's parent decides they want to leave the study that you're conducting that's designed to improve reading comprehension, but they still want the assistance in improving their child's reading comprehension. What are you going to do about that? How and where and with whom are the results going to be shared? And they should be. You should list that you somehow are going to share those results with the subjects. How the information or the data is going to be managed. This will probably not be to drugs, devices, and gases. Probably won't be something that you can write a short sentence about, saying that you're not going to be using any of those. You should be able to say that you're not doing a multi-site project at multiple institutions. That makes things a little more complex. And there's a place for a list of attachments. I'm not going to ask you to create any additional attachments that go along with this. But understand, if you were doing an actual submission of a study, and if you decide to actually conduct your study, and we should work closely together. If you do, don't just go ahead and run off and do it. That could have some repercussions. But if you decide to actually do your study, there are a number of other documents. You would need consent forms, and you'd need a variety of consent forms, and you would possibly need consent and assent forms if you're working with minors. And here's the list of the documents that they actually require and other documents that might be appropriate. And there's just something at the end here that describes how it all should be done. So I hope that helps you work your way through the human subjects form. I can guarantee you it's going to help you think more clearly about your project and about the practicality of the process and procedures that you have in your head.